Hello, Sally.
Hello, Sally. How you doing?
Good. And so we're back for our monthly chat about a celebrity chart. Why don't you share with us who we're going to talk about this month?
Well, I should have double checked her pronunciation of her last name. Is it Anne Hesh or is it different than
I
that?
think I've heard Heche and
Hesh.
Heche.
Okay, okay. Because I was going to say, I was aware of her mainly through her relationship with Ellen, because I'm not even sure I have seen any acting that, in a movie or on TV that she's ever done. And I was just thinking about that this morning, but, I've been aware of her. I've read a little bit about her, and obviously, more recently, because of her, that uh, significant accident and car accident and her death, of
Yeah,
course.
she really erupted into the news last month with the kind of the shocking accident and the aftermath.
And since then, I've read a little bit about, her life and her acting. And, I think she was in a lot of, she was fairly prolific in her career,
Yeah.
really.
Actually, she was in two of my favorite movies that I actually own on DVD. One is 6 Days and 7 Nights with Harrison Ford, where she's just like a delightful rom-com comedian. And then the other is this political satire called Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro, and she's very funny in that too. So she really was a very gifted comic actress.
Do you think, was she in some dramatic roles that you're aware of? Do you
I
know?
think she did some independent films, but I think from what I understand, I've only seen one of them. It's called Cedar Rapids, where it was sort of an ironic type of film. And so I think she always did sort of a light type of role. And then in later years, I think she's done sitcoms.
Okay. Okay. So really more comedy and
Hmm.
sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that she's kind of a conflicting character, complicated character. When we were first talking about her, I mean, there's just a lot of contradictions about her.
Well, I think we sort of agreed there's some confusion about her and in her chart. I think as a result of, you're going to
Yeah, we'll dive
chart.
into. Yeah, on one hand, she's a celebrity, but yet or she's an actress where she's playing roles. But if you think, like, for example, Meryl Streep, we don't know a whole lot about her personal life. She mostly just in interviews talks about her roles. But Anne Heche was just like, she put everything out there. And sometimes the stories she put out there about her private life were contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also had the episode with Ellen, where she was coming out with Ellen, and they were being this brave, pioneering couple. And then all of a sudden, she went into a traditional marriage and had a child. And so it just, and she also would, in after years, say, the breakup with Ellen ruined her career, and yet she did go on to continue to work, in television, and she did a lot of voiceovers and read audiobooks. So if you look at her IMBD page, she was constantly working. So, it's just like what she says and the reality are kind of two different things. Does that sound fair?
I think so. I did read where, she had made some allegations about some abuse with her father. I believe one of her siblings, contradicted that. So,
Yes. Okay.
um,
So we'll unpack that as we look at her chart. Now she's a Gemini, which is not surprising as someone who puts everything out there. And that, can you see that okay, Sally?
yes, yes. So very near to the top of the chart there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also that Gemini in the ninth house is the uh, joy of the sun. So the sun just shines really brightly in that house. You think about that time of day, which is I think 4:51 p.m. in late May. So as we're getting closer to summer, how the sun is still very bright and it's
Mhm.
starting to move over towards that western horizon, but still shining a lot of light around it. And I always think that's a wonderful symbol of the ninth house. because that's a house of higher learning and travel and exploring new horizons. And her son said after she died, a bright light has been extinguished. So there was something
Huh.
about her that was very bright and shining for other people. But what do you think of that Mercury retrograde, just 5 degrees away from that sun?
So it's considered combust,
Yeah.
correct? Okay. So with Mercury being ruler of or being about communication, thinking, in retrograde, there could be some issues there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so too. Yeah, that Mercury is kind of swallowed up by the sun, but yet Mercury rules the sun. So that's again kind of contradictory. But I found that when the closer your Mercury is to your sun, the more you struggle with objectivity because you tend to see what you want to see, and your own beliefs, like that ninth house, your worldview, would really eclipse your ability to think through things in an objective, kind of empirical way. Does that make sense?
I think that would definitely make sense.
So that kind of explains that, she would kind of put out things about her life that weren't always objectively true. Her career hadn't been ruined by Ellen. She continued to work. And then we'll talk in a few minutes when we get to her moon about her family. But also, if you look at what's happening to that sun in her chart, it's being opposed by a malefic.
Mm-hmm.
So when you've got Mars in Sagittarius, now you can speak to Mars in Sagittarius, Sallie.
Well, I think Mars and Sagittarius, obviously, Sag is ruled by Jupiter. So there's an expansion there. There's sort of a desire for freedom. I think Mars in Sag, kind of maybe looking at the big picture, less at the details sometimes.
Yeah,
and a little bit more. I think Mars and Sag are accused of being very enthusiastic about starting things, but not necessarily as good at finishing things. And I've seen that sometimes.
Because it's fire, right? It's a fire sign that gets very passionate. Yeah, and you think Sagittarius is a truth seeker? And it's in her third house of the world around her. So she would be somebody who is constantly kind of trying to examine what was going on around her and forming opinions and ideas about it. And when you've got a conflict between Gemini and Sag like this, Gemini is gathering information, but Sagittarius is sorting out that information and forming some sort of a coherent philosophy about it. We recently had a North Node Gemini, South Node Sag during the pandemic, where we were getting lots of information about what was going on, but yet that South Node, the tide going out, showed that we were having a very difficult time sorting out what was truth in everything going on. So Anne herself has that conflict in her life that she would be, a Gemini has that antenna out all the time. They're always picking up information and forming ideas, and that she would, ninth house. And then
that's the information access, right?
Yeah. So she would be trying to form some sort of worldview or ideas about it. But then Mars down here is kind of keeps contradicting her, or she's searching for some sort of truth, but the evidence is not supporting it. There's that kind of push pull. And with the retrograde qualities of both Mars and Mercury, I would, that's more, you are not always moving forward. You're kind of, you think about a retrograde planet as moving backwards, it's kind of coasting. So she's kind of viewing a lot of the world as happening to her, instead of being proactive. So, this is very complicated. And what about, you think about the way we organize our thoughts. and negotiate through the world in the third house. What about a malefic, which is the malefic, out of sect, Mars, being in that third house? Would it affect your ability to process?
Well, I mean, as you detailed out, there's definitely tension between the Mercury and the Mars there. So, Mars has the more aggressive characteristic, more passionate, but I think you've laid it out pretty well, Sallie.
Yeah, I think, we're going to talk in a few minutes about her experiences with mental illness. And this is one of the things that tells us that there's maybe a lot of stress around the way she thinks and perceives the world. And so kind of taking what she's learned and putting it into some sort of a coherent whole that makes sense might challenge her. And also with Mars in that third house, she could be very challenged by other people in her environment. What you're saying is not true.
Yeah, particularly her immediate environment.
Yeah.
And then obviously that is both are squaring all that activity in the 12th house.
Okay, yeah, here's the elephant, elephant in the room. Yeah.
That's one of the key things, that obviously there's a stellium in the 12th house in Virgo, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury. So there's like this critical thinking element with, anytime you see Virgo, I think there's the analytical, critical sort of the critical thinking kind of thing. And it's all squaring those three planets.
Yeah. And so what would you think, for example, of her moon Pluto? How did that kind of manifest in her life?
Well, I know that, I read where there was some estrangement with her and her, or between her and her mother. And I'm not sure. I believe that there was somewhat of a religious, maybe a strict religious background in their family. And I'm not sure that the family, including the mother, believes some of the allegations with, that she had regarding the abuse by her father. There was something else I was going to say about that, and I just forgot.
Well, that goes back to the third house challenges. Who else challenged her? Story about her childhood, but her siblings, right? I think, was it a sister maybe who had?
I think it was one of the sisters. It did, I believe that there were several children in the family. The classic description of Pluto conjunct the moon is that there's either an extreme sensitivity to the mother's emotional makeup, or the mother was more controlling. You could use those interpretations perhaps. And I don't think either one of us knows enough about the specific relationship, but there was, some estrangement. And I think Anne talked about that in some interviews. Certainly in the sign of Virgo, again, there could be, maybe she perceived her mother particularly, or perhaps her dad too, whatever. Or the rest of the family is overly critical of her. Virgo can sometimes, be critical.
Yeah. And, you think about all this in the 12th house, the things that are hidden, kind of festering away in her subconscious. And as they bubble out, she's trying to express them in the light of day. And yet it's very confusing. She claimed that her father sexually abused her for the first 12 years of her life. And, that was refuted by her father, had since died, but it was refuted by her mother and I think at least one sister. But yet,
I think his sexual orientation was hidden also. So that 12, all the energy there, all the planets there in the 12th house might speak to that. And then we talked about how all that energy in the 12th, with the south node there, that she maybe transferred some of that energy over to the 6th house in Pisces, which is kind of an artistic sign, and that might explain, all the success that she did have in her career as an artist.
That's true. She could draw on a lot of these subconscious things to act, be an actress, and tap into sort of that collective unconscious and be able to emote, as other characters. And you can see that you go towards the North Node, and it's her work, or her creative work in Pisces, that is the direction she needs to go. That if she gets kind of pulled back into that darkness, then she starts to flail. And Jupiter, which rules that third house, the way she perceives and processes the world around her, is in Virgo, where it's in detriment, which I don't, Jupiter is such, it's the great benefic, but what happens to it when it goes into Virgo?
Yeah. So would that be described as detriment or fall?
It would be, yeah, it'd be detriment because it rules Pisces, so the
Pisces.
opposite
Okay.
sign. Yeah.
Okay. So it would have more of a difficult time to be benefic.
Yeah, I'd want to help her out, but I've just got these few poor things that I can give you, and especially,
go ahead.
Oh, especially on the South Node too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's very interesting. I mean, all those 4 planets with the South Node are pretty much right in a row. And I don't know, I haven't seen that very often.
Yeah, she's got a very strong pileup, so it shows that she's got a very her subconscious is always kind of bubbling away, and always trying to find a way to make things better and make things right. It's kind of interesting, she was born in 1969 of May. And so the collective energies at that time were, the end of the 60s.
Pretty volatile. Vietnam War was going on.
Yeah.
Protesting.
And people trying to make things right, protests. And yet, trying to go towards the North Node, towards that ideal, but yet there was so much of this sort of critical energy focused on the South Node. And it's interesting that summer was the summer of 2 really significant events. One was Woodstock, which is kind of the Pisces, and the other was the Charles Manson family murders, which they both took place within about a week of each other that summer of 69. And so you can see the kind of the darkness and the chaos with that Uranus there. And people with their own agendas and kind of not being able to see the forest for the trees. But then that ideal, that kind of Pisces, peace and love, and this world without borders. So you can see how Anne herself had that conflict kind of baked into her chart.
That's a really good point, to mention the collective energy and what was going on at the time.
Yeah, especially with her moon there, which is such a personal planet, is tied into that sort of collective. So just that sort of stirring and churning and trying to make things better, but yet, with the South Node there, the harder you try, the more difficult it becomes.
And again, because, Mercury is ruling that Virgo in the 12th, and it's under tension, certainly with the opposition of
Mars. Yeah, that's a good point.
That would also sort of, be disabling, in addition to the Jupiter not being as helpful as you like. Because I think in general, Jupiter in the 12th is usually pretty positive, isn't it?
Yeah, I always enjoy Jupiter transits through my 12th house because it kind of expands your depth of ability to meditate and kind of tune into that collective unconscious. And it's a very peaceful time usually. But in Virgo, it's going to struggle. to bring
Mhm.
its gifts, and especially with the South Node, and then especially with Uranus. And so we do know that throughout her life, she did have episodes of mental illness.
And for those of us who are into the philosophy of past lives, you know, and the nodal axis being an interpretation of that, I've read where you know, the South Node in Virgo, and certainly the 12th house might represent something that was part of you know, a past life kind of experience, and perhaps she was in a critical role at that time, and perhaps made some mistakes. You know, this is sort of you know, obviously an interpretation that we don't really know, but I'm just throwing
Mhm.
that out there because I'm particularly interested in that kind of
Yeah, and
thing.
that's always interesting to speculate, especially with such strong South Node energy.
So she obviously was a person of great ability,
Mhm.
and was able to rise from you know, difficult circumstances. I believe certainly financially there were some issues, and you know, where she described, you know, even not having very much to eat or whatever.
Mhm.
So she did make the most of that 12th house, I think, in this lifetime,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
that
and
she could.
and so even though she had these forays into mental illness, I think she had a psychotic break in the early 2000s when she was wandering the desert and said she had contacted some sort of god or goddess who was going to lead people on a spaceship. I mean, she,
Mhm.
but yet, even though she had these problems, she did then learn to heal that kind of North Node in Pisces. And
Yeah,
she
she
continued
had,
to work.
right. She continued to work. She had 2 children. She had at least one marriage, but 3 serious
Yeah, yeah,
relationships.
she had
At least.
two children that who seemed to adore her, and then you look at that Cancer midheaven, which would kind of give the promise of being, being very happy being a mother, and it also kind of gives her, if you look at the moon's aspect to the midheaven, it gives the promise of a successful career. Does that make
Right, right. With the sextile there.
Yeah. And so that she would find that kind of steadiness at moon midheaven. Yeah, when you've got 12 house planets, I heard Kelly Surtees say this, always look to the midheaven because whatever's going on in your 12th house, you can project into your career, especially, the ruler of the midheaven in
Mm-hmm.
good aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of goes back to what you were saying about her being able to use all this kind of darkness and chaos to be an actress and create emotions. But then, yeah, this question about her relationships. What's Venus and Aries? What?
Yeah, so Venus in Aries is also in detriment there, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
actually, yeah, it's in detriment because it rules Libra.
mhm. So there's yeah, it's a challenge, I think, in the 7th house. I was just kind of looking at the Mars in trine to that Venus. It's a
Mm-hmm.
wide trine, but that could explain a little bit of the fluidity she had in her sexual relationship orientation,
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
with Ellen. I mean, you could interpret it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, in general, I think Venus is very positive in the 7th house, but in the Aries sign in detriment, it's not as comfortable there.
Mm.
And certainly in a relationship with the Aries energy, you know, if it's all about yourself, that doesn't bode quite as nicely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you need to compromise, and there needs to be a balance. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
does
It
have
has.
that Libra ascendant, so
Yeah.
she's
She's got.
about learning balance.
Yeah.
And eh, um,
Yeah. This rules her chart. This Venus and Aries, and so you think
and it's
Aries is
very
real.
close to her descendant,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so it explains her charm, that, people liked her. And she continued to have a number of relationships throughout her life. And so that Venus in Aries is ruled by Mars, which, Mars sees it by trine. So that kind of makes her sort of successful in the hunt, don't you think?
Yeah, I've heard that Venus in Aries likes the hunt,
Yeah.
likes the excitement of new relationships,
Mm,
and they can get bored,
mm,
if someone is not, I guess, fun enough for them or active enough.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Mars and Aries, you meet somebody and you get them to fall in love with you, and that's the excitement. And so you see kind of what happened. She was with Ellen for 3 years, and then she was making a documentary about Ellen, and she uh, fell in love, I guess, with one of the people working on the documentary, so left Ellen for him. And then she was working in a TV movie or something when she was married to this other guy, and then, left this guy for the guy she was working with in the TV movie. So this is
There's an
something.
impulsiveness there, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
There can be.
yeah. Like you say, that something new and exciting, and it's not boring.
Hmm.
And this is kind of another kind of troubled point in her chart. If you look at Saturn, is ruled by this Venus, this very impulsive Venus, and Saturn really doesn't have any aspects in her chart. It's kind of an unaspected Saturn, so that's kind of a planet that's kind of trying to deal with everything by itself and not getting any help. Kind of a rogue planet, I think I've heard. So
Hmm.
I don't know, what would that say about that Saturn in Taurus in the eighth house?
Well, I think what you just said makes sense, and it's not aspected to anything really, other than, um, well, it's not that close to Venus by a number.
Yeah, it's
So
just Venus rules it.
I
But you
or
see,
but it.
Venus is in aversion to it. It doesn't see
Mhm,
Saturn.
mhm,
So yeah, that Saturn in the eighth house, that's eighth house. I've never really quite gotten my hands
mhm.
around it.
But
Um,
if you look at other, I guess it's others resources with the Saturn there, it would be difficult, so she kind of had to do stuff on her own quite a bit. And with
yeah.
Saturn being in Taurus, um, that can be very actually kind of a positive that you're going to work on stability
Mm,
and be sort of step by step plodding along with that. But it with the Saturn there, although that's her lesser malefic, right?
mhm.
It's not quite as negative perhaps as the Mars in her chart because she's got a daytime chart. But yeah, it's probably not the best.
Yeah,
Um,
Saturn isn't seen by the ascendant, in the eighth house. And I think intimacy is another eighth house signature. So it could go
mm,
back to some of her problems with sustaining a long-term relationship. That, it's fun in the chase and the connection, all the seventh house stuff. But when you have to settle down and have a joint bank account and
mm.
deal with each other's problems and issues, then it's more difficult for her to.
Yeah, and I think I read that there was some legal entanglement with maybe her ex-husband,
Mhm.
perhaps, and they talked about it in the recent news where it was going to be dropped at the time of her death. But I think she had a lawsuit there. So
Oh,
that could
okay.
be an indicator,
Was she
or
trying to
Saturn
get
there could
child
be an
support?
indicator. I didn't read enough detail about it. It was just a blurb about how that lawsuit was likely to be dropped.
Mm.
And then I know she didn't have a will, or at
Oh,
least
yeah,
that
big
I
eighth
read
house.
that
Yeah,
anyway. So it
yeah.
was like her, one of her sons, I assume the eldest, but he's early 20s, I believe, was
Mhm.
petitioning to be in charge of the estate. So that's interesting that she didn't get that together. Um, Although I've talked to some other people recently my age, and they don't have wills. I'm like, really? And you have kids?
Yeah,
Um,
I know. Yeah, that's definitely, you need to do that.
Yeah. But anyway, you could say Saturn in the eighth could maybe be an indicator of that.
And that's kind of floating around here, kind of like a free floating anxiety in her life. Like you said, when she was a teenager, she had to help support the family because they didn't have enough food. That's how she started acting, I think. Those were the jobs that she could get. And then, difficulty probably in shared finances, joint finances. Um, and I think too that this Chiron in the seventh house is kind of curious too. That wounding around relationships, you think that maybe that when she went into relationships because of the wounds from her earlier years, that she couldn't quite maintain a long-term stable partnership.
Right. That could definitely be,
And also, maybe not understanding the hurt she was causing. For her, she was just moving on. Why can't you be happy for me? I'm moving on. And Ellen has her moon right here on Anne's Venus.
Oh,
Her
really?
Aries moon.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you can see Ellen was probably I thought she loved me, and all of a sudden she's moving on, and so I can see that kind of wounding from other people, that she was just being Anne, with her Aries Venus, but probably didn't quite understand the impact that her kind of that sort of going through people's lives like a hurricane would have on other people. So anyway, and one other issue that came up before we look at the accident chart, I guess she was taking drugs at the time of her accident. Was that? So
Yeah,
where are
that
the
seems
signatures
to
in
be
her chart
indicator.
that would indicate maybe some problems with addiction? I think it could go back to that Saturn eighth house, don't you?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, you usually look at, Neptune as a possible drug indicator.
Yeah,
She's got
12th
the
house.
Neptune. Yeah, so she's got the Neptune that is sextile that Uranus.
Yeah, really Jupiter and
Jupiter.
even,
Yeah, Jupiter. I'm sorry, it's closer to Jupiter.
yeah. So it could be, she found some drug therapy at different times helped her. But yeah, that 12th house, don't you think, trying to escape the pain? And
that would make sense.
and then Mercury being in charge of that 12th house, not being able to think things through clearly. So yeah,
I'm looking at that too, that Neptune is sextile the south node there. That's interesting. And
trine the north, which
Mm.
explains her role as an artist and how creative she was.
Right. Yeah, Neptune isn't always about drug use.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's maybe more that moon in the 12th house, and its ruler Mercury being under such difficult circumstances. And Mars, is a wide square to that moon. So just trying to escape the pain of that kind of inner self that she was always listening to. I would think with so much emphasis on the 12th house in Virgo, but there might be an inner voice that's always telling her, you're not good enough.
A critical voice.
That she's fighting with. So anyway, so let's look at what was going on at the time of the accident. I saw an article that said that the accident occurred shortly after noon. And you see that okay?
Yes. This looks like a very, you've got a lot of color on this chart.
I reset Solar Fire to do bi-wheels so I could see the house number. And it's easy, it's harder to read. I can't figure out how to put it back to the way it was. So I'll keep experimenting with that, trying to get it clear. But Are you able to look at it on the screen okay and see?
Yeah. No, I'll have to
Yeah, it
got
takes
it.
a minute to get your eyes used to that. Yeah, maybe
It's
I'll see.
pretty. It's pretty. I
Yeah.
like the color.
I know Solar Fire and I are making friends inch by inch. It's
Well, it's probably a little, learning curve. But
yeah.
you've done really well, Sally, with all this tech stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those things you can teach an old dog new tricks, but it takes a long time for that old dog to learn it. Okay,
Oh.
so I read that the accident happened shortly afternoon on August 5th, 2022. And so I figured what I would do is put it at 12:30 because let's see. Oops, this is not the right chart.
And again, so we're referring to, she had a horrific car accident out of control. And didn't she it plowed into somebody's house?
Yes, yeah. So oops, I've got to reset the time here. Just give me a minute.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, she was driving erratically, and didn't she hit two other charts or two other houses?
No, I can't remember, but I do remember reading, it seemed like there was one house that I remember reading about, and the owner at she was actually in a very forgiving mode. She felt very badly about Anne dying, of course. And so I
Mhm.
thought that was a really good way to accept what happened to her.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
the compassion for
mhm,
the
mhm,
person who died.
mhm,
Yeah, so I set it for 12:30 on August 5th. So that's the outer wheel. And you can see the ascendant here is and descendant is with her Saturn in the eighth house. I thought that was sort of an interesting signature of her death that you think of Saturn.
right, right.
She was enclosed in a burning car for 45 minutes before
Mhm,
they were able to free her. And Taurus, she had smoke inhalation that I think damaged her lungs
mhm,
and cut off oxygen to her brain. So,
mhm.
so sometimes if you look at the signature of or the planet in the eighth house and then what it rules at Aries acting very erratically.
Mhm. And
Um,
that Chiron, the transit Chiron, because I look at that too
mm,
sometimes on these kinds of situations. And so that would be opposite her ascendant, close to
yeah,
her descendant.
coming close to that descendant, right? Yeah, and so that's definitely one of the signatures. But if we
You,
look,
oh, go, sorry,
no,
Sally.
no, you tell me, what do you
Oh,
see?
well, I was just, Uranus is another one that I would want to look at,
Mm,
what was happening with that.
definitely in her eighth
Um,
house with Mars.
mhm. Yeah, right, with the Mars. Mhm.
That she would die, violently and erratically and shockingly. And that the North Node would make it big, it becomes
Mhm,
a national
mhm.
news story.
Yeah, I mean, that would seem to be pretty blatant right there, that eighth house uh,
Definitely. And it's all
transit.
ruled by that Venus, which
Mhm.
of course is in Aries, but where is Venus in the accident chart?
Trying to find it.
Right? Okay, you see it
Oh, there it is right there. Yeah.
exactly on her
Yes,
midheaven.
on her midheaven. Yeah.
So
So
that
in
this,
some respects, it's kind of like Venus on your midheaven isn't a negative thing.
no.
But obviously, it could explain the news and being very prominent in the public arena. This accident was all over the news.
Yeah, and Venus, if you look at the natal promise of Venus, it's in detriment. And then Venus is in charge of, this kind of crazy show that's in her eighth
Mhm.
house. So Venus,
It
you
is
know,
squaring her natal Venus, right? I can't
yeah.
remember the
Oh,
Venus.
yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah. And her descendant, ascendant.
Hmm. So that's tension. But
Mm-hmm.
in general, a Venus transit over your midheaven, I would think would be positive. But there's, obviously it depends on the indicators in your chart and what else is going on.
Well, and plus, at first people were like, oh my gosh, what an irresponsible person that she would behave that way and be so reckless. People were kind of angry, but once they realized how gravely she was injured,
Mm-hmm.
and that, she was eventually put on life support, and you can see that the public sympathy kind of changed. And they were remembering her, as a funny actress that they liked. And
Mm-hmm.
so like she got a lot more positive publicity after people realized the gravity of her
Mm-hmm.
injuries. Yeah. And another thing you think about is Neptune.
I was just looking at Neptune right there when you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. What does that tell us?
Anthony on the North Node, and it's opposing all that 12th house
Mm.
planetary energy, isn't it? Yeah.
And she's had that going on for quite some time. Neptune has been, I would say through 2020 at least, been opposite her moon. And so for the past 2 years, Neptune's been slowly making its way through her sixth house, opposing, first the moon, then Pluto, and now it's approaching Jupiter and her
So,
south.
so that Neptune transiting the sixth house definitely indicates health issues. And perhaps that also explains some of the drug abuse.
Mm.
Because it sounded to me like, from what I read, that that wasn't the first time she had been, using, drugs in recent times.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that this pain, she
Mm-hmm.
was trying to self-medicate. Um, again, that Jupiter ruling that sixth house, which is in detriment in the 12th house, things that she doesn't see. I can picture her maybe thinking, oh, I can deal with this myself, and I don't really need anyone's help. I can, figure out what drugs I need. And
Because now I didn't follow that quite, Sally. What were you saying?
well, with Jupiter as the ruler of that sixth house, and so
Okay.
Jupiter is not in the greatest shape in her chart. It's at the
Mm-hmm.
south node.
Mm-hmm.
It's in detriment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can picture somebody in Virgo, thinking, oh, I can get this alternative therapy instead of, doing the hard work of going through mental health treatment. And I can figure this out. And then when the pain gets too much, maybe just turning to drugs that you get, on the street. Or she could even abuse prescription medication, I would imagine, but I don't know if you could get a prescription for fentanyl or cocaine.
I was just reading, or I just saw it was a Hulu limited television series with Michael Keaton starring on opioid abuse and the about the OxyContin taking of that. I mean, yeah. The 12th house, it seemed to be more mental pain than probably physical pain, would you say?
Yeah.
Sure. Except for obviously this accident,
I
but
kind of like to, in a fanciful way, think this is illnesses of the body and this is
Mhm.
illnesses of the soul,
Mhm.
the 12th house.
Mhm.
So she's
And
abusing her body.
right. And in her chart, it's very connected to her mental state.
Mhm. Yeah. So, yeah, I would think that whatever's been going on the last couple of years, she's probably been self-medicating or else just dealing with all this kind of past pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's also kept it hidden, because she's continued to work and
Mm-hmm.
been out there, working that good midheaven, which is in sextile to all of this. But so I
Well,
would imagine
I
her.
think she's not the first person, the first actor, artist, that has had to rely on medication or drugs.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's, we've read about all kinds of overdoses over the years, and the hours that they work, the pressures they're under. It's not like a steady job necessarily either.
Mhm.
There's a lot of rejection. So I think it can be a very difficult career, and people can end up, trying to rely on
Mm-hmm.
medication to
Yeah,
get
to kind of
through it.
carry themselves through it. Now that's a good point. That and this is the house of work as well. So it could be, like you say, she's been experiencing a lot of insecurity. Of course, if we're going from 2020 and 2021, definitely some insecurity.
Mm-hmm,
Not many people were making movies and TV shows
mm-hmm.
in those years during the lockdown. So
Yeah, so monetarily, I don't know, she had two still fairly young sons. I believe they're both
mhm.
boys, her children. So single parent, the pressures of supporting them. And they're obviously, maybe they're looking at college, and
Yeah.
you're gonna pay for that. She was obviously suing a past spouse, probably the father of her. I think there were two different fathers.
Right. I think she had one son with the husband, and then she had a relationship with someone after her husband, and then she had a son with him. So,
But I got the impression somebody she thought owed her money. So, she was definitely pursuing that up until the time of her death.
yeah. And she
So
has
those
right now
questions.
the South Node going through her second house.
Mm,
So that's kind of the
good
tide going
point.
out
Yep.
and
Yep.
feeling like her income. And that's been
Hmm.
going on since I think spring of last year, 2021. So she's probably been feeling that pinch. In fact, it went over her Neptune and now is here at 17 degrees.
And she'd have a particular sensitivity to money woes, just her early childhood.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, not thinking that you have enough for food and shelter when you're a child, that leaves a wound that stays with you for life. And any type of economic insecurity that comes along later triggers that. And so that's when you get situations of people who have a lot of money but yet feel very poor,
mhm.
or that it could disappear at any moment.
And
Um,
she's got a lot of earth energy there, right? But it's in the 12th house. But Virgo, I always think of as very proper, and hardworking, and more detailed, and um, with that earth energy, there's a lot of emphasis on possibly providing for, you know what I mean? Uh,
yeah. Yeah, I would almost wonder if money was coming in, it was good, because Mars rules her second house, and she's got that to trine to Venus, but yet with that opposition to Sun Mercury, maybe not so good at long-term planning.
mm,
Kind of that would go back to Venus too in Aries, that the money's coming in and you're spending, and you aren't putting aside, you aren't bearing a few nuts for the winter.
oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have
That's
to.
okay. So anyway, yeah, so economic insecurity could be part of what's going on with her, as well as some mental health struggles um, at the time of the accident. And then another thing that I was just listening to a lecture by Kathy Rose, who's an astrologer I think a lot of, and she said, pay attention to the sun moon midpoint in your chart, especially transits to it from the outer planets by opposition, square, conjunction. And she has her sun moon midpoint at 28 degrees or 27 degrees of Cancer right here. And so what's Pluto doing?
Where's Pluto? Oh, right down there. Oh, wow. Opposing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I encourage people to look up their sun moon midpoint and notice when the outer planets make conjunctions, oppositions, and squares, because those are very transformative times, according to Kathy Rose. And so, when Pluto is opposite your sun moon midpoint, and it's been there, for most of this year, going back and forth, it's retrograde right now. I would imagine that she's been feeling just like her life is very insecure, wouldn't you think, with that Capricorn to Cancer?
Right. And I mean, that's very dramatic. Pluto, planet of transformation there, opposing that. That's very interesting about the Sun Moon midpoint.
And with that Sun Moon midpoint being in her 10th house, maybe she was having a lot of career anxiety too. She was,
Mhm.
like you had mentioned this before, when women get older, it's harder for them to get parts. And
Mhm.
she was 53.
Mhm.
And so she's got that going on. She's got Jupiter um, crossing her Chiron in the 7th house. I don't know. Would you think that would, maybe she could possibly even have been in a relationship that was causing her some pain?
Hmm.
Just a
I don't
speculation on my
know.
part there, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that wound is being expanded
Mhm.
as Jupiter
Mhm.
is going back over it. And
Mhm.
then also, the quincunx aspect is not something we look at a lot, but I found in charts, when we have difficult experiences in our life, you need to pay attention to that 150-degree angle, because it shows kind of a disconnect.
So Sally, so you're looking at
So
Saturn.
Saturn is in Aquarius,
Mhm.
so it's
Mhm.
making a quincunx to that Pluto exactly, and,
Mm,
and the moon by 2 degrees.
right.
And so here she's doing what she wants to do, that Saturn and Aquarius in the 5th house,
Mhm.
and yet some sort of a karmic, um, I don't know, what would you call that? That moon Pluto in the 12th house, that the effects will just be very dire. And this is also, the 12th house is a house of undoing, self-undoing.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and she definitely did that.
Yeah, so by kind of pursuing her own
Mhm.
path here, doing
Mhm.
things her own way,
Mhm.
she created such stress that it affected her um, ability to really live in the world.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's a very good point about the quincunx
Yeah, yeah. So,
junk.
and you don't want to give them too wide an orb, but I think when it's exact like that with Saturn and Pluto, that's worth
Mhm.
paying attention to. And even the moon
Right.
just 2 degrees away. So that kind of suggests even death, wouldn't you think?
Mhm. And the moon representing the body too.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah, no, you definitely want to look at Saturn, Mars, Uranus.
Mhm. And
Um,
and that we have to revisit again, because this is what's interesting in the chart. You think, well, yes, this is a big pile up in her 8th house, but what is it doing to her 12th house planets?
mhm. Yeah. Actually, well, that's a trine though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in a way, perhaps it was a releasing of the pain that she was
Mhm.
experiencing, and um this may have been her time to exit out, if
Mm.
you look at it that way, that could be an indicator.
Yeah. Yeah, because that kind of threw me for a loop, because I was expecting to see this pile up in Taurus being creating squares or oppositions in her chart, but they aren't.
Mhm. The transiting Saturn and Mars are also squaring.
Hmm.
That's kind of interesting, just in general, the energy,
Yeah,
the
that
collective
kind of
energy.
doing what she wants to do, and
Mhm.
bringing about death.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's, so I think there's something going on a deeper level, don't you think? With, it's not just she was, in a very difficult situation and she made some poor choices and she died. It was, I think something was going on in her soul level, don't you?
I think that could very well be. I mean, we don't really know um, our exit plan necessarily,
Yeah.
but I do believe that there is at some deep soul level an exit plan for all of us that we've agreed to, and perhaps this is what happened with her. And
Mhm.
I don't think anyone else was injured in this
No,
incident.
no. No, that there was
So
damage to
it
the
was,
house, and the
mm-hmm,
person who lived in there, I think, had to go find somewhere else to live. But I think
mm-hmm,
there was a GoFundMe to help her, and so she was
mm-hmm,
able to find another place to live and replace her belongings. But
mm-hmm.
um,
Usually I think the second Saturn return can be an exit point for people if that's what's in the cards, you know. So I'm not sure about age 53. Is that
no,
right?
she wouldn't have that until she's like 59,
Right.
58, 59.
So she's a few years
Mhm.
you know, away from that.
Yeah, this
But
is a
I sometimes I'll look at obituaries and note the age, and there can be something about that. Not necessarily for everybody, you know,
mhm.
but
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that second and third Saturn returns. You a lot of times see
yeah, and the
people in their late
third.
80s.
Right, right.
But yeah, in her case, I think, she just was in a lot of pain. We kind of detailed, Neptune
Mm-hmm.
has been working away for a couple of years. Pluto has been at that sun moon midpoint. She's had a lot of demands on her to change, a lot of deaths and rebirths kind of happening.
Mm-hmm.
Uranus in her eighth house, that could be she's lost some work or some money. There's some
Mm-hmm.
financial instability, and she realizes she's getting older and hasn't really got a game plan for how she's going to retire. And but I think just on a soul level, just in very deep pain, because all these
Mm-hmm.
other things are problems that you can work through.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that it's almost like she took the window to go.
Right. And you know, if you look at it as a continuation after we leave the earth, um, you don't have to look at this as a total tragic situation.
Mhm.
I mean, you can take that view, obviously, for her family, her kids. You know, that's a hard pill to swallow, perhaps. But yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense in terms of certainly we looked at that with Naomi Judd too. There was, in a way, there was sort of a release of pain. And you know, at some point we're not going to live forever. And so maybe this was part of Anne's plan, even though for us it seems horrific. And you read all about that in the news. It's very dramatic, you know, very sad on that level. But it seems like there are certain indicators that explain things anyway, and that's, to me, that's part of astrology too. That's one way that it can kind of explain stories so that you can better accept or perhaps understand. And I don't know, it just makes me feel more comfortable with life in general.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
using this as a tool. But I think this is I don't have anything more to point out. And you've pointed out so many elements here, Sally. And
Well, my final prediction
oh
about
yes,
her chart,
prediction. You have a prediction. Oh wow.
as Uranus moves through Taurus and it's going to make a trine to that Jupiter and then to her nodal axis and her Uranus, I predict there's going to be some wonderful legacy, maybe put together by her sons or something where the people who loved her will want her death to be meaningful and do something, whether it's endow a scholarship fund or create a drug treatment program or something. I think we're going to see over the next few years that somebody does something to create something for Anne's legacy. So that would be my prediction.
That's a good one. That's a really positive one. I don't know or I don't remember, her sons are really young, but if they had any inclination with
Yeah.
acting or following in her
Mhm.
footsteps. Do you? Um,
Yeah, I don't know if they're acting or what they're doing, but yeah, I think something will come forward. And she had friends who loved her too, so
mhm,
something will be. People want to make her life meaningful,
mhm,
and they'll
mhm,
do something. Uranus, it might be something kind of unusual
mhm,
as her legacy.
mhm.
Okay, so anyway, may we send good wishes to her family and for the rest in peace, Anne Heche.
Yeah.
Okay, Sallie. Well, we'll see you next month when we talk about another celebrity chart.
Okay. Thanks, Sallie, for all your time and research too.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay. Talk soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye.